खप्नेले बुझ्छ है, अर्को बाहिरको मान्छेले सही गलत भनेर हुने होइन। र अर्को यो वुमेन एम्पावरमेन्टको कुरालाई पनि अलिकति म तोकेर भन्छु। वुमेन एम्पावरमेन्टको डेफिनेसन्सहरूलाई के लाग्छ? कुनै एउटा नयाँ ठाउँमा गएर इम्प्लोइड हुनु होइन, पोलिटिकल सिस्टममा ऊ दह्रो हुनु, अनि ऊ आफ्नो पैसा पनि कमाउन सक्छ, उसले घर परिवार पनि पाल्न सक्छ भने त्यतिमा मात्र म वुमेन एम्पावरमेन्टलाई डिफाइन गर्दिनँ, त्यतिमा मात्र म वुमेन एम्पावरमेन्टलाई चाहिँ टुङ्गाउँदिनँ क्या। बलियो महिला वा महिला विकास भनेको त्यो हो, ऊ जस्तो सुकै पोजिसनमा होस्, उसलाई नराम्रो लागेको कुरा, उसँग गलत भइरहेको कुरामा उसले आफै बोलोस् क्या। एउटा फ्याक्ट हो, सायद होला विभिन्न संस्थाहरू हुन्छन् होइन, हामीलाई पछि गएर सहायता गर्ला, हामीलाई जस्टिसहरू देला, तर प्रोटेक्सन भने नि फिमेललाई मात्र गर्ने हो क्या। आफूले केही गलत भयो भने आफूलाई मात्र प्रोटेक्ट गर्न सकिन्छ, न त बाबाले, न त मम्मीले, न त ठुलबाबाले, न त छिमेकीले, कसैले गर्न सक्दैन। यो फ्याक्ट हो। अनि त्यसपछि यदि एउटा महिलाले इभन सी इज अ हाउसवाइफ, ऊ घरमै काम गर्छ, तर उसले भन्न सक्छ कि मलाई त्यसले छोएको मन परेन, मलाई यसरी बसाएको मन परेन, ऊ त्यत्तिकै बोलेर ऊ आफ्नो लागि बोल्न सक्छ भने द्याट इज कल्ड वुमेन एम्पावरमेन्ट इन माई डेफिनेसन। एन्ड म छोटै बनाउँछु, म भर्खरै लेखिरहेको, भर्खर उम्रिरहेको एउटा लेखक हो, यस्तै आवाजहरू उठाउन अझ चाहन्छु। अनि यस्तै गरी मलाई सपोर्ट गर्दै गर्नु होला। र लास्टमा चाहिँ म प्लिज बी स्ट्रङ एन्ड चाहिँ स्पिक फर यर सेल्फ होइन। भोइस इज द बिगेस्ट थिङ। दाबेर नबस्नु, कोही पनि यहाँ मजबुरी तल दाबेर बाँच्न आएको होइन, यहाँ जिन्दगी जिउन आएको सबैजना। सो स्टे ह्याप्पी, स्टे स्ट्रङ। थ्याङ्क यू।
धेरै धन्यवाद कृपा, तपाईँले जे गर्नुभएको छ त्यो आफैमा एउटा क्रान्ति हो। हामीसँग फेरि पनि अर्को एउटा युवा प्रस्तोता हुनुहुन्छ जो उमेरले त भर्खर 20वटा वसन्त पार गर्नुभएको छ, तर उपलब्धिले हरेक युवालाई प्रेरित गर्छ, उहाँको उपलब्धिले हरेक व्यक्तिलाई लोभ्याउँछ। उहाँ हुनुहुन्छ साहित्यकार विज्ञता कार्की, जो हाल फुल स्कलरसिपमा नर्थ वेस्टर्न पोलिटिकल इन्स्टिट्युट अफ चाइनामा ब्याचलर इन सिभिल इन्जिनियरिङ 5th सेमेस्टरमा अध्ययनरत हुनुहुन्छ। र हालसम्म उहाँले 4वटा पुस्तक प्रकाशन गरिसक्नु भएको छ भने आधा दर्जनभन्दा बढी अवार्डहरू जितिसक्नु भएको छ, र 2 दर्जनभन्दा धेरै पुस्तकहरूमा कभर आर्ट पनि गरिसक्नु भएको छ। त्यसै गरी उहाँ अन्नपूर्ण पोस्टको जुनकिरी अङ्क 2 को सम्पादक पनि रहनु भएको छ भने साहित्यिक परिवार नामक नेपाल संस्थाको चाहिँ संस्थापक अध्यक्ष समेत हुनुहुन्छ। युवाहरूमाझ आफ्नो केही अनुभवहरू, युवाको आवाजहरू सँगालेर बोलिदिनु हुनको लागि म साहित्यकार विज्ञता कार्कीज्यूलाई हार्दिक अनुरोध गर्न चाहन्छु।
सम्पूर्ण महानुभावहरूमाझ म विज्ञता कार्कीको हार्दिक अभिवादन। म सकेसम्म आफ्नो मन्तव्य छोटो राख्ने प्रयास गर्छु, तर आफ्नो विचार जतिसुकै छोटो समयमा प्रस्तुत गर्न खोजे पनि त्यो कहिले पनि पूर्ण हुँदैन र सदैव कन्टिन्युअस गइरहन्छ। राजनीति निकै चाख लाग्दो र सधैँ चर्चामा रहिरहने विषय, त्यसमा पनि युवा र राजनीतिको सम्बन्ध कठोर विश्लेषण गर्दैछु म। विकासोन्मुख, विवादित र कहिलेकाहीँ व्यङ्ग्यात्मक, तर तिनै कारणले गर्दाखेरि आज युवा राजनीतिमा केवल सङ्ख्यामा मात्र सीमित नभएर सशक्त सक्रियतामा परिणत भइसकेको छ। झन् नेपाली युवा महिला राजनीतिज्ञको सहभागिताको कुरा गर्ने हो भने निकै प्रशंसनीय छ। मात्र 33%बाट आज निर्णय लिने अवस्थासम्म, लिडरसिपको उदाहरण लिने अवस्थासम्म आइसक्दाखेरि यो सङ्घर्षको यात्राको एउटा बिन्दु हुन सक्छ जहाँ हामी सन्तुष्टको सास लिएर गर्वान्वित महसुस गर्न सक्छौँ। तर यदि रुट लेभलमा गएर समस्याको समाधान गर्ने हो भने यात्रा अझै निकै लामो छ र यो यात्रा कठिन पनि हुन सक्छ। तर हामी जुन तीव्र गतिमा अगाडि लम्किरहेका छौँ, जुन अथोट साट लम्किरहेका छौँ, गन्तव्य पक्कै पनि टाढा भने छैन। एउटा बिरुवालाई उम्रिएर हुर्किन कति मेहनत लाग्छ होला। निरन्तर मलजल र हेरिरहँदा पनि ऊ आफ्नै गतिले, आफ्नै ढङ्गमा बिस्तारै एउटा विशाल वृक्ष बन्छ र त्यो वृक्षमा अनेकौं फल फल्छन्, लटरम्म फल फल्छन्, त्यसमा कुनै कुनै कुहिनु स्वाभाविक नै हो। तर बेलैमा त्यो कुहिएको फललाई के गर्ने भनेर निर्णय लिन सकेनौ भने त्यही कुहिएको फलले बाँकी सम्पूर्ण फललाई असर पार्छ र सम्पूर्ण वृक्षको अस्तित्व र औचित्यलाई प्रश्न उठाउँछ। र यसबाट बच्नको लागि हामी समाधानको रूपमा यदि त्यो वृक्ष नै काटिदिने निर्णय गर्छौँ भने त्यो पटमूर्खता हो, त्यसले कहिले पनि समाधान निम्ताउँदैन। कुहिएको फुल कुहिरहेको छ, सधैँ फल पनि लावारिस छ, त्यसको जरा जुन छ त्यो माटोमै अडिरहेको छ र जुन ढालिएको रुख छ त्यहाँ लम्पसार परेर आउने नयाँ बिरुवाहरूलाई पनि त्यो रुखले छेकिरहेको छ, अवसर रोकिरहेको छ। त्यसैले वृक्षलाई काट्नु समाधान होइन, बेलैमा त्यो कुहिएको फललाई सदुपयोग गर्यो भने त्यो कुहिएको फल पनि मल बन्छ र बाँकी फल हामीले मौसम अनुसार लिन खान सक्छौँ र त्यसको शीतलता त सदाबहार रहिरहनेछ। यसले एउटा वृक्षको मात्र समस्याको समाधान गरेको छैन। अब यदि हामीले भविष्यमा नयाँ वृक्षहरू रोप्नु पर्यो भने त्यसमा आउन सक्ने समस्याहरू र त्यस समस्यालाई कसरी समाधान गर्न सकिन्छ भने पूर्व तयारी र सिक पनि पाउँछौँ। हो, यही जीवन हो र अहिले नै राजनीतिको अस्तित्व पनि यही हो, स्थिति पनि यही हो अहिले राजनीतिको। त्यही भएर सर्टेन एजदेखि सर्टेन एजसम्मको युवाको हुल बटुल्ने अनि महिला समावेशीकरण भनेर हामीसँग एक दुईजना सदस्य महिला पनि राखेका छौँ भनेर हुँदैन। यदि आरक्षणको आवश्यकतालाई पुरा मात्र गर्ने हो भने युवाको जस्तो जोस जाँगर, समय सान्दर्भिक सोच र त्यो सोचलाई इम्प्लिमेन्ट गर्न सक्ने सार्थकताको आरक्षण राख्नुपर्छ। र मैले यो भनेको यो सबै कुरालाई यथार्थमा बदल्नको लागि महिलाको जस्तो त्याग, सहिष्णुता अनि त्याग सहिष्णुता मात्र नभएर उहाँको जस्तो उदार मन र उहाँले जीवनमा लडेको सङ्घर्षको यात्रा जस्तै त्यस्तै जोस जाँगर र सामर्थ्य, सहिष्णुता, ममता सब थोक चाहिन्छ। र त्यसरी मात्र हामीले सोचेको र चाहेको समाज निर्माण गर्न सक्छौँ र त्यसपछि मात्र राजनीति र राजनीतिज्ञ हुनुको औचित्य पूर्ण रूपमा सफल हुन्छ भन्दै म आफ्ना व्यक्तिगत धारणा यही रोक्न चाहन्छु। धन्यवाद।
धेरै धन्यवाद विज्ञताजीलाई। Moving forward, it is a great pleasure to invite the coordinator of Asian People's Movement on Depth and Development, very dynamic leader, global campaigner, Lidi Nakpil, to deliver her presentation on role of youths in international development. To introduce Lidi, she is the coordinator of Asian People's Movement on Depth and Development. She is also an activist working on economic, environmental, social and gender justice issues in national, regional and global campaigns. A member of Coordinating Committee of Global Alliance on Tax Justice and the Global Steering Group of the Fight Inequality Alliance. She is also the coordinator of Global Campaign to Demand Climate Justice and serves as the convener of the Philippine Movement for Climate Justice and the Vice President of the Freedom from Debt Coalition. Lidi, over to you.
Can you hear me? I apologize, I cannot stand up, but I would like to stand up to give salute to all of the women, campaigners, activists, comrades here this afternoon. I'd also like to give thanks to Sujita, the Honorable Sujita Shakya, for inviting me to speak here, and all the other colleagues of ANWA, the officers of ANWA, and to also give my greetings to the Honorable KP Sharma Oli, former Prime Minister of Nepal. I am here together with a whole contingent of people from different countries in Asia because we have several events happening this week. One is taking place right now. It's a seminar for South Asian journalists. So we have journalists coming from Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, and also, of course, Nepal. They are gathered at another hotel. Unfortunately, we cannot bring all of them to this event. But also, we have leaders and my colleague staff from different Asian countries. And we're happy to be back here in Nepal because we were here last April for several series of events. And it's a place where many activists coming from different Asian countries can gather because it's a place that welcomes all people. It's a bit difficult to hold activities in other Asian countries where it's very difficult for some to get inside and be granted visas. You know how it is, the politics in Asia and in the world. So we always feel welcome here in Nepal, in Kathmandu specifically. So thank you very much for having us here in your country. I'm here asked to speak about the role of youth, actually not just in development, international development, but in facing many challenges that we are confronted now, especially in the last few years. Maybe I can just... where we can say the struggles for a better world has been so much more urgent and so much more difficult than ever before. Did I click this one? Oh, which one? Okay. So we all know that the year 2000 brought the most horrific conditions to all of humanity. And that was because the COVID-19 pandemic started in that year. I don't think we've faced any such condition ever before. And no one was spared. No, all the people and all the countries on our planet really suffered the impacts of this pandemic as we continue to suffer today, though they might say we're probably over the worst period, but because there's new variants coming up, we know that we are living still in very uncertain times. But the impact of the pandemic is not just on the health. We also all know that the impacts on our economies and the life and livelihoods of our people as they earn their income, their wages to provide a life for their families, that has been put under very terrible pressure. No? So many jobs and livelihoods have been lost because of this pandemic. Some temporarily, some permanently, because this pandemic is creating many changes in our lives that will probably not be brought to what they were before. But then apart from the economic difficulties already being made more difficult by the pandemic, because economic difficulties existed even before this pandemic, aside from that, we're also facing the crisis of climate change. So in the last many years, in the last decade at least, in our countries, we have seen the devastating impacts of this climate crisis. So I am reminded by at least one, and I know you have many more, experience here in Nepal, and that was a few years ago. And this is about the cloudburst that took place, and there was an avalanche in the mountains of the Himalayas, and many Nepali villages were affected and were in fact wiped out by this avalanche. So this is an example of how our lives have been shaped so differently because of the climate crisis. And it also reminds me of one specific thing that is an impact on the people of Nepal, not the same for my country, and that is the impact on your source of fresh water for life and for livelihoods. Because one of the most dramatic evidence of global warming and climate change is the shrinking of glaciers And I know that most of your fresh water are coming from that glaciers, and that is one major threat to food, to water, and to life for your people. And when we talk about climate change, it's not just about these extreme weather events. It's also about what they call the slow onset impacts. Less dramatic, but very real and accumulating so much so that they will also have profound changes in our lives. So I'm talking about in our country, for instance, Philippines, where I am from, is a country of 7,104 islands. And sea level rise will mean definitely that at least half of these islands will sink and disappear. We don't see it yet. The islands are still there, but sea level rise is happening. And in a decade or so, hundreds of our islands will no longer be habitable. So these are the kinds of impacts we're facing. And we're talking about this now because it's a call for the youth. All of you young people, as we were young people also once upon a time, that this is a time that we need to step up and do much more than what we have been doing in these recent years, because there is such urgency in addressing this, what we call the multiple crisis. The crisis of health, the crisis of the economy and of our livelihoods and jobs, and the crisis of the very existence of humanity and the safety of our planet. So I'd like to begin with just a little discussion on climate change so that we all know what is the urgency all about, or maybe for some, what is this climate change all about? So we say this is one of the biggest threats to the safety, well-being, and survival of humanity. So it's an existentialist threat. That is what they call it. There is a destabilization of climate systems because of global warming. And this continuous increase of average temperature on the Earth's surface, on land, on water, bodies of water, and on the atmosphere, it is already said by scientists of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, in its most recent report last April, that the world is now 1.09 to 1.12 degrees Celsius warmer than before industrialization, than before capitalism started. You might think that that's not a big deal, but we're talking about average global temperature, not in the changing of the weather or the seasons. But this is a big deal because for every half degree or full degree of warming, this means major changes in climate systems. And we know in the last 15 years, this had led to hundreds of thousands of lives lost, to millions of acres or when our babies have fevers, we're very concerned. And when the fever gets past a certain level, we're very concerned because it becomes a life-threatening situation. Our children could die. And that is what the planet is suffering now. At this point, the one that absorb the heat from the sun to make our planet livable. However, when there's too much of greenhouse gases absorbing the heat, the surface of the planet warms up or heats up. So that is what is happening now. All these types of greenhouse gases are increasing.